morning. We have a new lesson on the earliest Americans. We're starting chapter 2 in your earliest American student reader. So you can follow along. We've got some background information, and we are going to continue hearing about how the Americans ended up here in the first place. Do you remember the theory that we talked about in our lesson from last week, from chapter 1? So during the Ice Age, this land bridge, Beringia, was starting to break up, and the people that were following from Siberia over to America, they were following these huge mammals like mammoths and musk oxen. So they're following them over to the Americas, and they're traveling further and further south. Let's take a look at that map and the image of Beringia. This is from chapter, sorry, that's what we're going to get into today. But we need to be over here in your earliest Americans reader, which is on Bright Thinker now. You'll be able to access it. It's just a link in the folder. There's no due date. So anytime you want to look at it, it's in the history section under earliest Americans. So we've got the land bridge Beringia here that was connecting Asia to North America. So that is what it looks like today. Other than the pink part, Beringia is now just water. It's the Arctic Ocean, or the Pacific Ocean, sorry. I was looking up there, but we've got the Pacific right here. So that was separating the two continents, or that was connecting those two continents. And this would be the path of the Americans, and they'd be able to go all the way down to South America. And as it says here, that shows the Beringia migration. So we'll continue reading today in chapter 2, America's First Settlers, about more of how they migrated and some other ways that they settled into areas. Little background first. Let's see, right here. Let's take a look at this. Now, as the Ice Age warmed, the hunters who are now in North America followed their prey. They moved south through Western Canada, the Rockies, Mexico, Central America, and eventually, by about 10,500 BCE, all the way to the southern tip of South America. Now, some groups branched east until, over time, people reached the east coast of North America and the rainforests of Brazil. All along the way, some groups dropped out of the wandering and stayed in places that seemed hospitable. Let me go back to our map for a moment. So they were traveling along. This is the western coast all the way down into South America. And eventually, over time, they started moving east. And Brazil is right over here in South America. So they started traveling east within North and South America. And as we'll see in today's chapter, some of them found ways to settle in and not have to move about, which is ideal. So it says it's important to remember that this movement of people occurred over thousands of years. Now, as the ice disappeared, so did the prehistoric animals the hunters relied on for their food, clothing, and shelter. The animals may have died out because of the change in temperature or because the hunters killed too many mammoths, mastodons, and other large animals. We'll hear more about the mastodons in today's chapter. The lack of these animals may be one reason that groups moved on. They were looking for the ever scarcer big animals to hunt. To make up for the lack of big game, hunters turned to smaller game, which is a term used for animals that are hunted, such as deer and rabbits for their food. People also began to pick wild plants, nuts, seeds, and berries, and to dig up roots to eat. It is probable that people were gathering wild foods as early as 15,000 BCE. Even when people hunted, it is also likely they gathered other types of food depending on their availability. Now, early people in the Americas, like people in the Middle East in ancient times, noticed as they foraged for food that some plants were better than others. Some people reasoned that if they planted the seeds of these plants, they could get more food and get it more easily than by wandering over miles of land looking for berries and plants to pick. So it's original farming. This process of planting and harvesting wild plants for people to eat is called domestication. Now, with domestication of plants, the development of farming ensured a steady food supply for those cultures that adopted farming. The most obvious benefit of a steady source of food was that people no longer had to search for food. Because farming required staying in one place, settlements of a few families grew in size as the population grew. With a steady diet and better food, people were living longer and having more children. Once a number of people were gathered in one place, some form of authority was needed to organize them for the public good and to keep order. This was the beginning of government. However, even those who were nomads or semi-nomadic hunters had some form of organization that ensured order within the group. All civilizations, across the world and over all times have had to have some rules and laws and government in place in order to dictate how they interact with each other. Okay, moving on. However, I read that part already. Now, whether a chief and advisors ruled a city-state of 10,000, as in the Aztec city-state, which we'll learn more about in 5th grade, or an extended family group of 30, as with the tribes of the Great Basin, someone decided what was to be done and who was to do it, and made certain that everyone did what he or she was supposed to do. Now, the development of Native American cultures in North America is somewhat different from what occurred in Mexico and Central and South America. While some groups, such as the Anasazi in what is today Southwest United States, the Mississippian culture of the Southeast, and the Northeast woodland people, they both hunted and farmed. Many North American native peoples remained mainly hunters. So less farming, a lot of them stayed hunters in the northern parts. Now, some also participated in widespread trading networks. So there are people who hunt for their food, there's people who farm, there's people who trade, and then there's people who have a mixture of all of those. Now, as groups dropped out of the general migration and adapted to the environments in which they had chosen to settle, they began to develop different languages. And a fundamental change was in the words that were necessary or important to different groups. People who became farmers would need a large vocabulary that referred to crops, tools, and the growing process. Those people who remained hunters might develop many more words relating to the hunt, to the animals they killed, and the uses they made of them, such as food, clothing, and teepee coverings. So basically, language developed over time to fit the needs of the people. If they are talking about mastodons because they were hunting mastodons, then maybe that group needs to have a word for it, but other groups don't even have a word for it at all because they don't come encounter with it. So that's a little background information. There's going to be some overlap with this next chapter we're going to be reading. So let's begin chapter 2. Now, more than 15,000 years ago, Ice Age hunters in Beringia, like the ones in the story from chapter 1, were moving into North America. But many scientists believe that earlier people may have arrived about 30,000 years ago by sea along the Pacific coast. Now, at that time, hunter-gatherers could not move very far into North America. Huge ice sheets still blocked the way. Now, about 14,000 years ago, the ice sheets began to melt. The Ice Age was ending. Hunters could now follow herds of animals farther and farther into North America. First, they spread across most of what is now Alaska. Then they moved south through what is now Western Canada. Let's go back to that map to see where we're talking about. So they're moving further and further south, staying on this Pacific coast from Alaska over to Canada. Between 9,000 and 15,000 years ago, groups of hunter-gatherers spread out through this new world. Little by little, they moved into the ice-free parts of North America. As you can see here, the white represents the icy parts, and so they're starting to move further east and south into the parts that do not have ice covering them. They walked everywhere and traveled all the way to South America's southern tip. Here is an image of some of the tribes that we'll be hearing about: Haudenosaunee, Cherokee, which is closer to where we are today, and then Creek and Seminole tribes, which we're going to hear more details about each of those. Now, by now, the climate was getting much warmer. Water ran off from the melting ice sheets, carving out giant river valleys. So they're not only going to the warmer areas, but also the ice age was ending, and so there's melting ice all over the place, and they carve out some valleys. Now, North America's huge Great Lakes filled up. Melting ice water caused oceans all over the earth to rise. Many areas along the coasts were flooded, including Beringia. So it's now just sunk down, it's underwater. The rising sea cut North America off from Asia. Now, the various groups of people found two vast continents to live in and all the animals they could hunt. They continued to hunt large mammals such as the mastodon, which is quite similar to a mammoth or an elephant. I'll show you an image. Quite a bit larger, though. Here it is in comparison to, oh, I'm sorry, it's actually a little bit smaller. So there is the American mastodon compared to the mammoth, compared to an African elephant. Now, over time, the climate changed, and this caused many large mammals to die out. The change in climate destroyed many of the plants the mammals ate. And overhunting the mastodon also helped to reduce its numbers. So it is now extinct for these reasons. It's possible that they overhunted, but also with the climate changing, they possibly didn't have the right food. They were not able to acclimate to the new climate. So thousands of years passed. Groups of people moved from one place to another. As they moved, they learned to live in their new homes. They learned to use the resources available to them as well. They developed hundreds of languages. Their ways of life changed to fit the different parts of North and South America where they lived. Today, we consider these people Native Americans. Now, about 7,000 years ago, people in Mexico discovered how to plant and raise corn. Slowly, many other Native Americans began to grow their food. For many groups, the ability to grow food meant they could stay in one place for long periods of time. In some cases, they stayed in one place permanently. In other areas, however, the climate or soil was not good for farming. So in those places, the Native Americans remained hunter-gatherers. So this shows the first corn raised by farmers in Mexico that looks quite different than what we would see today. So that's the best, is if they can stay in one place, have a home there, and grow their own food, and have domesticated animals. So that's all for chapter 2. In chapter 3, we'll see later on this week the people of the far north. So we'll see what it's like, the Inuit Indians, Native Americans. So we're looking at specifically the groups of people in like Canada. I have a link to this website for you to take a look at as well, which relates to several of the chapters that we'll be reading. It's this really cool website called crowcanyon.org, and it shows different eras of Native Americans. Paleo-Indian is what we're reading about now, in the time of about 13,000 to 6,000 BCE, or BC. So it gives you some information about it. And it shows you a map. You can play around with that to see the way it was during the Ice Age with Beringia versus what it looks like now. Once again, connected to Siberia. And it has some extra information there that's really interesting to look at. Here's some of what we were talking about with the food that they had, including mastodons and mammoths that they hunted. Shows you what the houses looked like, which differed according to what part of America, because this is talking about the whole area of North and South America. But in general, these are what the homes looked like at that time, and some artifacts as well. So we'll get into other eras, and you can certainly feel free to look ahead at what those are like. And for each era or time period, there's a map to show you what area we're looking at, the food that they would eat, houses, artifacts. It goes all the way up to modern time. Okay, so really cool website. I'm going to have this linked so that you can, It'll be part of today's assignment, but it's also going to be up in the folder so that you can look at it in any time. Once again, it goes with a lot of the chapters that we're going to go through. Okay, that is all. I hope you guys are enjoying this study, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.